first of all, it was really exciting. Leaving the MTC, I loved the MTC, actually. Most missionaries, I think, got tired of the MTC, and maybe this makes me weird, but after 4 weeks, I actually thought, like, I would rather stay in an intermediate district just so I can keep getting the food, and there's all the classes, and, like, this is just a total spiritual high, and for me, the schedule wasn't, the schedule was easy because it was better than what I did during school. I actually got 8 hours of sleep, which was unusual. And so I was just really enjoying it, and there's ice cream bars in the cafeteria, and I said, this is great. So maybe that's why I had to leave with the advanced district. I don't know. Maybe the Lord didn't want me to get too comfortable, but it was exciting leaving. The entire district, your MTC district, because missions have different days that they receive missionaries, your district kind of like leaves person by person and a little bit at a time. So over the course of a few days, everyone leaves, but they're all leaving kind of at different times. But when you leave the MTC, at least for me, like the morning that I left, of course the night before was exciting, packing and stuff. Not that there was that much to pack. It all fit in one suitcase, but making sure that I had everything, and then we get up early the next morning, and there's all of these missionaries outside waiting with their luggage, and then we all load into vans and go to the airport. And then on the plane, so my branch president gave us all some pass-along cards. I don't think he actually gave us copies of the Book of Mormon, but he gave us pass-along cards to use on the plane. And he said something like, don't do anything stupid, but try to give these out. So I was sitting on the plane, and I still remember the first baptismal invitation I extended, because it was on that plane. The person was not interested, unfortunately. But I was sitting next to this woman, and I can't remember whether she spoke English or Spanish. She probably spoke English, but I almost feel like I was speaking in Spanish. It was in English, I'm sure, though, because my Spanish still wasn't that good. Well, I'm not sure, but so I started chatting with her, and then I started telling her the story of the restoration, and I now have gotten good enough at judging like body language to figure out that she probably didn't really want to be hearing this. Not that, yeah, I don't know. So, but I kept talking, so I kept sharing the story of the restoration, and then at the end I'm like, if you come to know that these things are true, will you be baptized? And I don't remember her exact response, but it wasn't a yes. So, that was a little Elder Calhoun moment, I guess. But it was good. At least I went into the mission field with one attempt at extending a baptismal invitation under my belt. When I arrived at McAllen, though, so we went through a couple airports, and I was probably traveling with a fairly large group of missionaries who were going to my mission or other Texas missions, and eventually we got in, and I think we arrived. So we arrived in an evening, and then we went to the mission president's house, and he fed us dinner, and then we got our assignments, our companion assignments, and that was neat. So there's a little bit of like spiritual thought stuff, and a dinner with President Miller. It was brisket, I think. It was quite good. And then we would each go in one by one to the mission president's office, and he would say, you've been assigned to this area. This is who your companion's going to be. And kind of a funny side note, there were 2 Elder Clarks in my mission. Just 2 missionaries with the last name Clark. They were actually spelled differently, their last names, but pronounced the same. And I go into the mission president's office, and I, so I talk to him, and he tells me I'm going to serve with Elder Clark, and he gives me his full name. And I'm like, okay, I guess that's fine. Like, I don't know anything about him, but I'm like, okay, that's okay. And I leave, and then later that night, the mission president is like, actually, I need you to come back in here. And he says, I told you the wrong Elder Clark. You've been assigned to serve with the other Elder Clark. And for some reason, I'm like, okay, that feels great. I'm just like, now I feel better about this, which is really funny. They were both fine missionaries. But that was entertaining. So I was assigned incorrectly, apparently, at first. And then we went to the assistants to the president there, apartment and spent the night on cots or something while they assembled all of our bikes, which had arrived in the mail. And then the next morning we got shipped. We went on vans and were delivered to our various trainers, our companions. And so that's kind of how it started. I should say, though, the morning that we were brought to meet our companions, that was the morning of transfers. And so at transfers, you get a lot of missionaries congregating at various stake centers around the mission to go meet up and get in vans and get moved to their new companionships. But I did run into my cousin there. So that was good. Saw him for the first time. It would be at least 6 or 8 months till I saw him again. But it was a good welcome to the mission. So we took a picture together with his camera, I guess, or something like that. And at some point he must have sent that back home because it's still on my grandma's fridge. I've been home for 3 years, but that picture is still, she blowed it up, printed it out, and it's still sitting on her fridge, attached by a magnet. And then went to my to my first area, which was in Corpus Christi, Texas. Corpus Christi is famous for 2 reasons. One, because President Ulysses S. Grant accidentally stepped off of a boat and fell into the water there before he was actually president. Actually, most people are not aware of that, but it's true. And then the second one, it is the home of the famous Latin artist, what is her name? Tragic story. Drawing a blank here. Selena. Yes. I don't know if you've ever heard of Selena, but anyone who likes Latin music probably knows Selena very well. She was very iconic. She was almost like the JFK of Latin music. Born in Corpus Christi, died tragically, was attacked by an officer in her fan club, and could have been saved medically, but there were some things that basically there were several reasons that she shouldn't have had to die, but just the way things worked out, she did. So sad story. Raised in Corpus Christi, and still her music is famous to this day. So that's what Corpus Christi is famous for. But I went with my companion. It was actually awesome because they already had a couple baptismal dates, some pretty solid investigators. One 14-year-old girl who, her name was Sarah. She was amazing. When we arrived, when I arrived, she had already completed like half of her personal progress. She was not baptized yet. So she was just kind of like one of those golden, I don't know, just a teenager. She was answering all the questions in Sunday school, and she was like an example to all of the other kids in the class. So she was there, and I got to teach her the first couple days. The first day, actually, we get into my apartment and set down my stuff, and I don't know if we took lunch or anything, but after that, we just went out and worked, and it was good. The McAllen Mission, it's actually very unique in a lot of ways. First of all, there's some well-known universities there. Texas A&M is in Corpus Christi, for example. Pan American University is, I believe, in Brownsville. I could be wrong on that. Maybe it's in Harlingen or something. But probably a lot more interesting than that is the actual location of the Texas McAllen Mission. So San Antonio is like on the bottom of the state. Texas McAllen is below that. So we're way in the south. If you think of a picture of Texas, you know how it's got like this little square part on top that's like a handle, and then it's got something like this, and then at the bottom there's this tiny little like peninsula. So we are that peninsula right there. And what that means is that in many of the cities in the area, most people don't even speak English. You get down to Laredo or Brownsville, and everyone speaks Spanish. And there's a handful of English speakers, but for example, you'll have a Spanish steak, and in the Spanish steak, or you'll have a steak, and in the steak there's one English-speaking ward, and like 12 Spanish-speaking wards. And so all of the English speakers from the area will go to that one ward, from the entire city. It might be a city of 200,000 people, but they'll all go to that one ward. And then there's a lot of other Spanish wards and branches. So that's an interesting thing. And I mentioned before that all missionaries in the McAllen Mission, this is unique to McAllen. There are only a few missions, I think, that do this currently. But all missionaries learn both Spanish and English. And that's actually really nice as a missionary because you never have to give a referral because you can't speak the language. So you can contact someone in Spanish 1 second and in English the other second. And it only makes sense this way because some households, people like, we would teach, there was a member family once, I remember we did a lesson and the husband only speaks English and the wife only speaks Spanish. How that works, I don't know. But, and so you would almost like have to be bilingual to teach these people. We even ran into one person at one point who told us that he neither spoke Spanish nor English, and that there were, or rather that there were words in Spanish that he didn't know and words that he didn't know in English. And like he didn't have a complete vocabulary in either one. So that's how mixed the languages are down there and the culture. And so the result is that in some ways it feels kind of like Mexico. In two of my areas, in Brownsville and in Laredo, they're both right on the border of the Rio Grande, so you can see the river sometimes from the area. My apartment was 6, 7, maybe 8 blocks from the river. Maybe like 10 or 12, but in Laredo. And there's a lot of great things about that. And you know, at the same time, there's some things that are a little scary, like Border Patrol was there a lot. That wasn't super scary. But sometimes there'd be violence on the other side of the border or something. We never, I felt quite protected and quite safe on my mission, and I'm not aware of any missionaries ever having had like any issues with being accosted or anything in the mission. But it is interesting because it's on the border and there's a lot going on right now on that border. But great people, very bilingual. The food is great because again you're getting the Tex-Mex and it's a lot of Mexican food. But you've also got people from Honduras and El Salvador. All of the Hondureños that we met were just really funny people. I don't know why. But also very nice. And the people down there are very nice. People who have absolutely no interest in our message, who are staunchly, well, many people are Catholic, but whatever their religion is, you'll find that the Spanish speakers in particular, they'll be very nice to you. If you are down there, you might be passing by and they'll be having a pachanga, which means barbecue, and they'll invite you over to come get a taco or something. I should explain, by the way, taco is not what we think of it in America as being. We think of this hard shell thing with ground beef, but actually in like Mexican cuisine, a taco just means meat in some sort of tortilla. And usually the tortillas are soft. So you can have a flour tortilla and meat, and you might think of that as a burrito, but it's a taco to them. And a burrito is kind of something different that has to do with beans, I think. But so those are all interesting things. And I guess maybe the last thing I'll explain is really quickly just the mission geography. Oh yeah, and one or two other interesting stories. So it starts up around Corpus Christi, which is the north part of the mission, and then it's kind of a triangle. So you go down to the west, and there's Laredo. And Laredo, I don't know, it's kind of a famous town in some ways. There's a song about it on the streets of Laredo, old country song or folk song. And Laredo is all Spanish speaking, basically. It's right on the border again. And I served there. That was where I served with my cousin. And great place. And then you go east, and you've got Brownsville. So the mission is like this triangle. And the north side is largely English speaking. And you actually have some Filipinos who speak Tagalog as well. So up in Corpus Christi, for example, I taught very few lessons in Spanish, and I taught probably at least as many Filipino investigators as I did like Mexican or Hispanic investigators, which was interesting. Great people. Good food, by the way, the Filipino food. But And then once you get into what we call the valley, then I'm not sure why we call that the valley, because there are no mountains and not really much room for a valley down there. It's very flat. But then everyone speaks Spanish, or at least there's a lot of Spanish. And you've got a good mix of English and Spanish. You can still find plenty of people who speak English. But in large part, especially as you get closer to the border, most people speak Spanish. So. One other thing about the McAllen Mission is that it contains a very notorious location, South Padre Island and North Padre Island. North Padre is not infamous. South Padre is where all of the spring breakers from colleges throughout the U.S. go to party during spring break. And it's kind of a wild place, and missionaries are never allowed to set foot there. So needless to say, I did not serve on South Padre, but I did serve on North Padre at one point. So it's still Padre Island, but they're kind of divided by this, I don't know, it's pretty hard to get from North Padre to South Padre. I think there might be a highway going down there, but North Padre is just a bunch of fairly affluent white people for the most part, demographically speaking. There are probably some, it's probably a little more mixed than that, but housing in South Texas is really cheap, so actually you can get a really nice house on North Padre and it doesn't cost that much. Yeah, so North Padre, it's just like kind of like the place where you would move after you've made a reasonable amount of money to go retire or something. Nice place. There were some members on the island who were super cool. We would teach some of our investigators in their homes. And then, by that is Flower Bluff, which was the part of Corpus I served in. Great area. So if you go to the McAllen Mission, there's a couple things that you should be aware of and probably try. So two things that are really common in the McAllen Mission, especially in the valley, again in the southern portion, are they have these trucks that come out, and of course they've got your typical like ice cream truck, but then they've got other trucks that they do, I think, probably sell like shaved ice and stuff. But they also sell other things like what they call lote, which basically means corn. But it's corn, this is going to sound delicious. Your mouth is just going to water. Corn smeared with mayonnaise, corn on the cob, smeared with mayonnaise, and then with chili powder on it. This is a big thing down there. So anyway, keep an eye out for that. I'm sure that if you go to the McAllen Mission, your trainer or somebody will tell you about it. But the other thing, and this is actually much more important to me, paletas. That means basically like popsicles. There are these places called paleterias, which are popsicle shops, like ice cream shops. But they make the best ice cream like ever. These ice cream bars, what they do is they take some kind of fruit, like cantaloupe or watermelon or coconut, and they grind it up and they add water and a little bit of sugar, and that's all they add. And then they freeze it into like popsicles. And they are so good. And they're really inexpensive. I'm not sure how much they tend to be, but it's like 50, 75 cents, so it's not that bad. And you'll find that in some areas there will be men who will come out with push carts with dry ice on the bottom to keep it cold, and inside they've got a bunch of these paletas. And so as you're proselyting, you will probably run out across these guys. And I like hardly ever bought these things. For some reason I was like, no, I shouldn't be spending this money on paletas right now. But actually, I think I should have been, because they were really good, and so I kind of missed out on that experience. I did have some of them, though. There was a shop that members owned in one area that, again, they were just delicious. So if you ever run across a guy pushing a cart with popsicles in it, you buy one of those popsicles. Paletas. One other thing about Texas is there's a place called Whataburger. You'll have to look out for these. It's kind of like a Burger King, but it's big and it's orange and it's everywhere. So, and they'll bring the food to your table, so you order and you sit down, and then they'll like bring it there. But in Corpus Christi, actually, once we saw there was a Whataburger, which the roof looks like this giant W. It's really interesting. But And right next to the Whataburger was some sort of like general like Christian church, and they had a sign that said "What a Church" right next to it. But anyway, keep an eye out for those. In South Texas, so once you get down into the valley, there are a lot of immigrants. Of course, many people who are living there have immigrated legally, and there's a lot of illegal immigration there as well. And serving in South Texas actually has had a little bit of an impact, well, a pretty significant impact on the way that I think about immigration, just as a general topic. I'm a pretty law-abiding person, so generally I feel like, well, if there's a law, then people should be respecting it, and that's basically like where my stance is. But as I went down there and served among these people, I realized my views changed a little bit on the subject, and the reason is this: as I look at these people. Previously, I had supposed, well, these are people who just I didn't actually have much of a supposition about it. I hadn't thought too much about it, but I generally think of, well, you should obey the laws of the land. But a lot of these people who are there actually, even illegally, first of all, I've taught many immigrants who didn't have legal permits to be in the U.S. or to work there or anything, and they, as a group, they're hardworking, good people. I've actually done research on it since, and it turns out that the crime rate is much lower among illegal immigrants than it is among legal residents of the U.S. In part, well, there's a few reasons for that, but actually more significant to me is that crossing a country line illegally, well, I mean, it's illegal, of course. It's a misdemeanor, kind of like, I don't know. But I realized that the situation that many of these people are coming from, especially if they're on the border, it's actually a very rough situation in northern Mexico at this point. There's a lot of drug cartels down there, and there's a lot of things happening, and there's a lot of violence. And the result is that many of these people who have come to the U.S., in the situation that they're coming from, the law is irrelevant isn't quite the word, but the law doesn't work as well down there. And there's a lot of illegal things happening. And because there's some corruption, that means even government officials are sometimes doing very illegal things, and certainly gangs have a significant amount of power in those areas. And so in an area of such lawlessness, it makes a lot of sense to cross a border to get away from it. And while that seems like an illegal, in some ways we think of that as, oh, well, this is illegal, they're crossing, but actually many of these people are refugees in some ways, where they're escaping a very bad, violent situation and trying to find not only a better economic opportunity, but actually an area where they're much safer. And so as I've thought about it, as I've gotten to know these people and heard stories about how things are on the border. Now, not all of Mexico is like that. Certainly Mexico, there's many areas that are fantastic to live in and very safe. But especially close to the border and the areas where many of these people are coming from, that's not necessarily the case. And of course, there's also people coming from a lot of places other than Mexico. But with that realization, I guess that the biggest thing that I learned working with those people is to be a little less judgmental of the people that want to come into the U.S. And that's not necessarily any political commentary or anything, but just a personal realization that these people had very good reasons for doing what they did, and actually, had I been in their place, there's a very good chance I might have come to the U.S. And because it's very hard to get a legal visa, it makes sense that they wouldn't have really another option if they felt like that was really what they needed to do. So that's just an interesting, difficult thing. And working with people who had come into the U.S. Without documentation, as a mission, we didn't really discuss it too much. But but we did basically operate with the understanding that it wasn't necessarily our place to judge why these people are here, or what they're doing, and that the gravity from a legal standpoint of the offense was comparable with a number of things that we do even as members of the church, like speeding or other things that are also misdemeanors. And that's not to make any sort of strong commentary again about that political issue, but from an ecclesiastical standpoint, we don't. But we certainly still teach those individuals, and in some cases, what was I going to say? Yeah, but we teach them, and we don't deny people who are in the U.S. Without documentation the opportunity to learn about the gospel. And so some of the people who I taught, who were some of the strongest people who we taught, didn't have papers. There was one brother who had come from. In his case, he did come from Mexico. We did teach one person from Honduras. It was fun as well. But he was a musician. He earned a living by playing his guitar, and then he also made donuts, and he would go door to door and sell them. And he was good friends with the ward mission leader, and so we began to teach him. Great guy, super enthusiastic. He was just, from the get-go, he was really excited about the gospel. And he became baptized, and immediately after became ward choir director. And I think they had him in the elders quorum presidency as well, like a month after baptism. And then about a month after that, he got deported. And that's something that you see as you're down near the border, that some of the people, there's a lot of challenges and a lot of fear, of course, that are associated with being in the U.S. without having that documentation. Of course, the Border Patrol is there, and their job naturally is to find people who are not legally in the U.S. and send them away from the U.S. But so these people have. There's a lot of struggles. One, of course, they can't get the kind of work that someone with the work authorization could, and so as a result, they tend to take lower paying jobs, and they have to work very hard at them, and they often work 18 or more hours. They'll work a lot, or at least 12 to 14 hours a day. And then often they'll either save it. The man from Honduras who we were working with had figured out that he could have enough money to buy a home if he worked for a year or two in the U.S. He could buy a home in Honduras, whereas in Honduras it would have taken him 10 plus years. And so they'll leave their families often. This man, his family was in Honduras, and that was very hard for him. When we taught him, he was talking about potentially moving back earlier than he had planned, just so he could be with his family. But because of a number of those factors, these individuals tend to be very. They don't have a lot of money, but they're still very sharing, and individuals who had immigrated illegally would share their food with us, and we knew they didn't have very much, but they were very open and free with everything that they had, and generally kind individuals, and so it was interesting seeing my beliefs and my way of seeing things coming into the mission kind of being challenged by the reality that I ran up against as I met these people and I worked with them. And I saw their goals, and I found out why they were in the U.S. And some of our investigators had family who were killed by gangs while we were there on the other side of the border. There was a family that we baptized in Laredo, that they had a cousin on the other side of the border who was killed very violently because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time by one of the gangs there. And so you think about that kind of situation, and anyway, that just kind of changed for me, at least, the way that I viewed that situation. So when I received my mission call, it turns out that actually I was called to the same mission as my first cousin, John, who I basically grew up spending time with. We would actually fight a lot growing up, but we played together too. We were good friends. So that was kind of a surprise. I got my call and read it, and my dad was like, I think that's where your cousin John's going. And so we looked it up and found out that was indeed the case. And so I arrived in the mission field one transfer after he did, which was interesting. Or 2 transfers, actually. I got there 2 transfers after. But anyway, so that actually, I didn't think that I'd ever, be his companion, for example, or anything. Of course, that was very unlikely. But we did see each other throughout the mission, and then it turns out at one point we were companions. So being companions with my cousin John, first of all, it was interesting because our mission president was he was a pretty strict isn't quite the word I want to use, but I served under President Miller and President Traynor in the McAllen Mission, and President Miller was just very very by the book, like kind of, I guess, cut and dried, straightforward, just, be very obedient and such. Of course, most mission presidents probably are focused on obedience. But he wasn't the sort of mission president that I would have seen putting cousins together. I felt like the fact that we were cousins would probably mean that we would never serve together. But I was serving in an area at one point, and it was a pretty eventful night, but I'll hold it to this phone call. So I get into my apartment, and we were actually on exchanges at the time, so I had another missionary, not my companion, with me. And I get a phone call from the mission president, and he says, "Elder Meservey, I felt impressed that I should put you and your cousin, Elder Meservey, as companions." And he said, "What do you think about that? Would you be okay with that?" And of course, I'm like, "Sure, that sounds great." So I go to Laredo. He was serving in downtown Laredo, El Centro, which means downtown or the center, for those of you who don't speak Spanish. But I get there, and we spent just one transfer together on bikes. But it was great because I walk into the apartment where we were living, and one of the first things I notice is I go into the kitchen and I see a bowl of cinnamon sugar sitting there. And in my family, for Christmas and sometimes for special occasions, we'll have cinnamon toast for breakfast. And on my mission, I had thought about making that, but I didn't actually know how to mix cinnamon sugar, like what the proportions were. And so I hadn't had cinnamon toast in about a year and a half at that point. And I walk in and there's this bowl of cinnamon sugar, and I look at it and I'm like, I'm making cinnamon toast. So the next day I made cinnamon toast. And we would make like homemade donuts together, and there's a family recipe that our extended family shares called Sloopies that is kind of like tostadas or like burritos or something, but different. And we would make that like once a week. But because we were in South Texas and we had nice like fresh tortillas available, we would buy uncooked tortillas, and then we would cook them ourselves, and he would make pico de gallo. And it was great. So it was a lot of fun being with a cousin. And at the same time, we're actually very different. We were about as different as any of my companions and I got in terms of personality. I was more like uptight a little bit, and he was very very laid back. And so that was actually really good for both of us, I think, because we were very different than each other, and that might have caused a lot of conflict potentially had we not known each other as well as we did. But I knew my cousin, and although we had different styles, like I loved him, and so I trusted him more than I probably had some of my past companions. And so I trusted his motives. If he did something that I didn't fully understand or I didn't think was the right way to do things, then rather than just thinking to myself, oh, that's, I don't like this, or I think this is wrong, I would look a little deeper basically and say, well, I'm sure that he's trying to do the best that he can. And that actually was really good for me. And I think likewise, I think it was good for him similarly to have a combination of someone who he already knew and and cared about, but who had a very different approach to missionary work in some ways than he did. So it was really neat, though. It was one of the most productive transfers in my mission. And we were in downtown, and if you ever get a chance to be in a downtown area on bikes, contacting is ridiculously easy because there are like millions of people outside, and all you have to do is ride your bike by them, and you can contact like 5 in a row. And so the typical, I found that I was in 2 downtown areas of my mission, but the typical goals, like mission-wide goals that we had regarding contacting, in our mission, it was 20 contacts a day, 20 lessons a week, 2 baptisms a month was kind of the standard of excellence. But it was really easy to meet that as far as contacts goes in downtown. And with my cousin, for some reason, like the way we worked, we were able to, we contacted a whole ton of people. It was kind of ridiculous, but I felt like we were more effective at teaching as well because we were different. Because he would, in many ways, he would identify a lot better with investigators because he was more laid back, and also with members, and people just got along very well with him, and I got along fine with investigators, but again, I was a little more uptight, and I think people tend to relate a little better to the relaxed sort of personality, and so that was really neat. So if you do go to South Texas, you will probably see a lot of dogs. And if you're afraid of dogs, don't worry about it, because there are some tricks that can help you. First of all, most dogs aren't actually going to do anything dangerous or menacing, but they do like to bark. And Chihuahuas really like to chase you when you're riding a bike. I will admit that I have kicked a Chihuahua. Actually, most missionaries have while riding bikes, because you'll be riding along and they'll like try to nip at your heels, and like they'll actually like kind of try to bite you. Anyway, so Chihuahuas. You learn to love Chihuahuas in the McAllen Mission. That was a little sarcasm, but no. So there's a lot of dogs there. And this is something that I learned early on in my mission, which is very useful, actually. So it turns out, at least in South Texas, there is a magic way to get dogs to keep their distance from you. So if a dog is coming up and it's barking and acting menacing, and it probably won't actually ever try to bite you, but you probably already know that you should not turn and run. That's like the worst thing you can do if there's a dog there that's like menacing you. But what usually works is you push the magic button on the ground. So what that means is actually you go down and you point, like you act as if you're reaching for something on the ground. Like, for example, like you're picking up a rock. And so you act like you're reaching for a rock, and then you bring it up in your hand as if you've got a rock in your hand to throw. And usually the dog will get quite a ways away from you at that point. And as long as it thinks that you have a rock in your hand, it will stay a ways away from you. You don't actually have to have a rock. And you certainly don't need to throw the rock, or the imaginary rock. But 95% of dogs will keep their distance if you do that. Yes, the other 5% usually only exist in people's yards, and you do want to be a little careful when you're going into yards. There was one point where we had an appointment with someone who I kind of already knew wasn't interested, but we went to the door anyway. So we get to the house, and I walk halfway to the door. I go through the gate, walk halfway to the door, and my companion stays outside of the gate. And as halfway to the door, I stop and I think, didn't they have dogs? And right then we hear this barking, and these 2 humongous dogs come out from like behind the house. And they're barking, and again, dogs generally aren't dangerous, but if you're in their property, then like at that point, dogs actually, you need to be a little careful, because dogs are very territorial, and a lot of people have dogs specifically to guard against people in their property. If the owner is there, then the dogs won't bite you. But if you're trespassing per se, or in this case, going to the door without people, without the owners being there, then that can be a problem. So first piece of advice, if they've got dogs and the dogs are not particularly friendly, get like your keychain and hit your keys or something heavy on your keychain against their metal fence, because lots of people have metal fences, and that's kind of like knocking, and people will hear it inside and they'll come out, and that way you don't have to risk getting attacked by dogs or anything. Now, alternatively, if you do what I did and don't think about that and walk halfway across the yard, at that point, first and foremost, do not turn and run. I made the mistake of turning and running. So at that point, first of all, I looked at the dog, and of course I tried my push the magic button on the ground trick, which worked briefly, except again, I was in their territory, and so the dogs were much more aggressive than usual, so that actually made them mad. They did keep their distance, but they got a little angrier. And then I realized this was probably not a good situation, and I should have like backed up to the fence, but I didn't. I said, well, I can get to the fence first, which was true. I did make it to the fence before the dogs. But so I run to the fence. The fence is like this high, and I've got on a backpack that's probably loaded a little too heavy. And I push myself up on the fence. I'm going to swing my legs over. And somehow, before I even get to swing my legs at all, actually the dog didn't bite me. Sorry to ruin the suspense. Okay, but before I can actually get my legs over, I push up, and then it's like this. I'm like a seesaw. So my overweighted backpack pushed me over, and I'm pretty sure there was an angel behind the backpack pushing as well. Because I go, so like this is the fence, and here I am, and I go like this. And meanwhile, my companion is watching this, and he sees that the dog is here, and the dog is actually going like this. So my companion said that the dog actually, he saw it like get the fabric of my pants. I'm not sure if that's true, but I was very close to having a very painful incident with a dog. And so I highly recommend both using the keychain trick if there are dogs there, but also definitely do not turn your back on a dog that is menacing you. Yeah. But it was okay. I stood up, I was a little shaky, and then in my journal I made a diagram of the angel pushing me over the fence, because that's probably what happened, because it was just like, I go up and then instantly, like, my legs are in the air and my face is on the ground. As a missionary, regardless of what mission you serve in, the odds are that there's probably going to be some areas that are in kind of a more dangerous part of town. Maybe there's a big city in the mission. And I just wanted to share that while I was a missionary in Texas, in South Texas, especially close to the border, there's some areas that are supposed to be fairly dangerous. But we really felt quite protected as missionaries. And of course, there are mission rules that it's important to follow. But I felt that as long as we were following the rules and we were getting home when we were supposed to, we were quite protected. And I've heard stories from other people, but I've definitely seen that individuals, even people who don't have a lot of respect for the law, tend to have, especially in South Texas, they have tremendous respect for the missionaries. And part of that, it might be that the religious culture down there, which is, there's a mixture of strong like Protestant roots, but then there's also strong Catholic roots, and in both cases, and especially for the people who maybe whose ancestors were strong Catholics, they tend to just have a lot of respect for a religious authority and religious figures. And so it was neat to me, at least as a missionary, that I generally felt protected. I do feel, though, that to some extent, at least I felt like that protection was contingent upon me, that it depended on us being obedient and being where we were supposed to be, when we were supposed to be there, and of course not doing anything that was patently, clearly stupid. But as long as we were trying to use a little bit of common sense and following the mission rules, I think we were protected both physically and spiritually in most instances. And I know from speaking with other missionaries that the missionaries who were very obedient to the mission rules felt physically, but then also spiritually, they felt very protected. And more so in some cases than missionaries who felt that maybe they weren't doing everything they were supposed to be doing, sometimes felt that they didn't have quite, they didn't always feel as secure. And not so much physically, actually, but there were just ways in which physically, spiritually, just like there is actual protection in obedience. And I have a strong belief in that. And as a missionary, you have the priesthood, you have the Spirit with you, you have, as the scriptures say, angels around you protecting you, and the Lord will generally protect his missionaries. That doesn't mean that nothing negative will ever happen, but things that are truly dangerous or that are preventable accidents that shouldn't happen, the Lord, I really have a testimony that the Lord protects his missionaries, and that only things that he really plans on and intends to happen will happen as long as you're following the counsel of your leaders and being obedient. There's a few things about my mission that I feel really strongly about. One of those is, as I went through my mission, I felt like, although I wasn't always as effective as I wanted to be in every situation, I feel like the Lord had me where he had me for purposes, and sometimes that was clear, and probably most of the time it wasn't immediately clear in the moment. And honestly, often it was as much for my benefit as it was for those that I was teaching. But as I approached the end of the mission, one thing I did know is that there were things that I was learning as a missionary, and I wanted to go home, and I didn't want to have failed to learn anything that the Lord had for me to learn. And so for that reason, I felt it was really important for me to work right up until the end. There were some pretty important things I learned about myself on my mission just a day or two before I left. One of the most important realizations of my mission, and I won't go into exactly what it was, but it happened as I was working hard, like 2 days before I left, or the day before I left. And so I have a testimony that more important than potentially, at least sometimes as important as the work that you're doing, is the work that the Lord is doing on you through your work. And if not for any other reason, although there's a lot of good reasons to work hard on your mission, but I would really encourage you to work to the very end with the realization that the effort that you're putting in will actually, the Lord is teaching you up to the very end. There are things that you can learn. And there are benefits that will come to you through the rest of your life because of that, including the benefit of knowing that you endured to the very end of your mission, and that you saw beyond it, because your mission doesn't really end when you go home. You have a life mission, and actually your mission is a small part of your life's mission, but it's there to help. The Lord is training you to create the leader or the servant that he's going to need for the rest of your life, and he's preparing you for events that are happening later. And what you do on your mission will prepare you for things that will happen in your profession. It will prepare you for your family. And so as you think of your mission, think of it not as this is when I'm going to go serve, but rather as this is the time period that I have to become prepared for what the Lord wants me to do for the rest of my life. And I know that he... in my mission, I really felt that that he did teach me some things that were crucial. Before I went on my mission, there were some attributes that I had and characteristics that I recognized weren't who I wanted to be. And before I left, I prayed and I basically asked the Lord to help shape me so that I would no longer possess some of the negative traits that I felt that I had, and some really important things. I felt like, for me, righteous dominion was a little bit of a struggle, and I wanted the Lord to help me become, just to help me become more righteous in the way that I approached leadership and other things. And as a result, on my mission, I spent not that long as a leader in my mission, but the experiences that I had were, I think, exactly what I needed to have in order for the Lord to answer that prayer. And often that came through the Lord choosing not to answer some more immediate prayers about the work or about how I hoped that things would go on my mission, because the entire time he was shaping me into who I had asked to become and who he wanted me to be as well. And so I just want to bear my testimony that I know that the Lord has He has a plan for us, and as we go through our lives, and on a smaller scale as we go through our missions, it's important for us to be aware that beyond the service that we're rendering, the Lord is actually shaping us. And I share that testimony in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
There's this little part of the mission, Laredo, that has some hills, but besides that, it's completely flat. Like literally the highest you get is the freeway overpass. Like everything else is just like as flat as a table. And I remember like flying in and seeing that, I was like, man, there's not a hill in sight. Like, so if you're used to mountains, it's going to be a big change. But, and you'll get this a lot, like once you're there, and like people joke about it, but really once you get off the plane, it's like you hit a wall of humidity. Like you're all nice and cool in the plane, and then you get out and it's just like, you feel like you stepped into a sauna a little bit, especially in the summer. Like I guess if you came in the winter time, it wouldn't be as bad, but it's definitely a different world. I remember driving there, and it seems, I don't know, my first experience was, I was just a little scared. Like I don't really like change, so I was like, man, what am I doing here? Like it looked kind of like, I don't know, like a little gross, a little nasty, like just a little dirty, but like I don't know, I just like you come to love it a lot. And so at first, like at least for me, at first it like scared me. It seemed like a whole new different world, just kind of like older. Like all the buildings and everything seemed a bit older. There's like a lot of abandoned ones I saw. Like just you could kind of tell like you're almost or like in Mexico, and so you could like the Mexican border. It's only a few miles away from the airport, and so you could tell like it was different, but you just come to love it really quick. My first week was kind of hard because I was on a bike. And I just remember coming home like dead tired every night. Like I don't know if there's much you can do to prepare for that, but it just kind of drains you in ways that you weren't really expecting. And you know, that's one of those things where our mission's pretty lucky. Like half, if not like a little bit more, of the missionaries have cars, and so like there's that advantage. But like a lot of the times you'll find yourself on bike, and even if you're in a car, they ask you to be on bike a lot more. And so that was one of the things that stood out to me, that like that first week was just kind of like how similar to Mexico it was, and how, I don't know, just like hot and humid, and just being on the bike was really tiring. But like the people, like I still remember like my very first lesson I had. His name was Eduardo, and we just, yeah, it was just like really amazing experience, like after practicing in the MTC for so long, to be able to just sit down and like actually teach someone that didn't know the things you're teaching. And so that's definitely one of my like very strong first memories of my mission, was like just my very first lesson with just some random guy we kind of talked to on the street, and we were able to sit down with him. So, and that happens a lot. Everyone's really friendly there, so you'll have a lot of first lessons for sure. And yeah, it's a really unique mission. So it's bilingual, which means you'll be teaching in both English and Spanish, which is different because in a lot of missions they have like Spanish-speaking missionaries and English-speaking ones, but there it's just not practical because there's so many Spanish speakers that it'd just be, you know, it'd just be crazy to have to switch people off all the time, because even in the same lesson you're switching languages several times to talk to the kids in English and the parents in Spanish. And it's so that's one of those things that's really unique, is like you'll just be switching a lot between them both. And all the missionaries are required to speak Spanish. Even the mission president, his first language is Spanish, and so you'll be able to like practice that a lot in different meetings that you have. The boundaries, so the northmost part of the mission is Beeville. The easiest way to find on the map is Corpus Christi. That's kind of like the top right corner of the mission. And then Laredo, like directly across, is on the top left corner of the mission. And then McAllen and Brownsville are the very southern points. And so what happens is there's a lot more Spanish speakers in the south in McAllen and Brownsville, and in Laredo too. because it's along the border. You speak a lot more Spanish there. But when you go up north to kind of Corpus Christi and Beeville, Sinton, cities like that, you end up speaking probably 90% English. And so it's kind of like two different missions within itself, really. When you get transferred and you go up north, it's kind of, you get joked that you're like transferring out of the mission, but it's like pretty much everything, south of San Antonio. As far as like a temple, that's like one of the main goals of the mission, and it kind of brings up another point of, it's kind of like a sensitive topic for a lot of people, but illegal immigration. Like there's a lot of illegal immigrants that they get baptized over there, here, and they really want to go to the temple, but there's certain checkpoints on the way up, like before you get to Corpus and everything, that kind of keep them from going to San Antonio Temple, which is the closest temple to us. And so that's a big trial for a lot of really good members that want to go to this temple, but they can't. So a big goal of the mission is to put a temple in McAllen, pretty close to the border, so that everyone can have the chance to go. I guess, and then like kind of staying on the top of like immigration, it's kind of just like funny, like how it kind of works there. And I guess like the best way to put it in perspective is like in one area I was in, so normally at church we'd have like 200, 250 people, and that weekend the state sent down like 50 or 100 or so like state troopers to kind of just like catch some people and and catch up on like tickets and everything. And so like they're all over the highways, and everyone was like really scared to leave their home. And so normally we have 200, 250, and that weekend we had 17 members at church, and 6 of them were missionaries. One of them was the bishop. And so yeah, it's very different there. Like that just kind of puts in perspective in some areas just how many people are Hispanic and immigrants. And so that's a huge part of the mission, and you get used to it pretty quick, and the people are really nice, and you get a lot of definitely crazy stories. Like I've had a lot of lessons with definitely drug dealers and things like that, but it's very safe. Like you shouldn't worry about it. I guess with safety, like the biggest thing with the mission is to make sure like on your bike that you have like a lot of reflective tape on your backpack and everything, because I guess 3 years ago now, 2 missionaries were killed. You can kind of look it up, but they were, I don't know, they were biking on the street, and just a car, there's 3 of them, and a car didn't like see them, and so he hit them, and 2 of them passed away. And so that's kind of like a big focus. They'll give you some reflective tape when you get there for your bike and everything, but that's something that I made sure to do really well, is to put a lot of reflective tape on my backpack and bike, just to make sure you're seen, because that is like probably the biggest danger there, is just the really dark kind of dirt roads and like drivers that aren't very smart. So yeah, I guess like with culture, as far as that goes, everyone's really nice there. To be honest, like I only had maybe like 1 or 2 doors slammed in my face like my whole mission, and that's pretty impressive, because on my main mission it happened like 6 or 7 times in a week. And so it's a lot different. And those 2 times, like both of them, I remember they're like up in the north, kind of like stateside part of the mission. But when you're down south, like definitely everyone's really respectful, really nice. Like they always definitely recognize you as servants of God. It's just the hardest part is always like, getting them to church and getting them to act. And it's not like to discourage anyone or anything, but there's definitely people I've talked to every single day of the week about coming to church. And then Saturday night we stop by and have a lesson about coming to church. They meet members, they meet the bishop. Sunday morning, and the whole time they're saying yes, we'll go. And then Sunday morning you stop by their place before church and say like, hey, are you getting ready to go? And they're like, yeah, like we're getting ready, and you can see they're getting dressed, and somehow they still don't make it to church. And it's kind of like discouraging sometimes, but it's just, I don't know, it's just part of it, and it always works out. It's just kind of one of those funny things, like it'll happen to you at least once, that you just have those families that are really awesome, really great. They just have some trouble doing that one thing. But there is definitely a lot of people that come to church and get baptized. Last I checked, I believe which was a few months ago, like we're the highest baptizing mission in the southern United States. So kind of like outside of Utah. There's just a lot of really good stuff there, like a lot of people getting baptized. And I guess like the main problem that a lot of people have is like with activity. That's one of the things they're trying to change for sure, is to have a lot of focus on reactivation and keeping people active. But as far as baptisms goes, it's a really good place to go. It's definitely like not to say if you don't get a million baptisms you're not a good missionary, but like you'll have a lot of really great opportunities that sometimes people in other missions don't have. So yeah, it's a great place. This is a little different. Like normally, if you're from Utah, you have like 2 missionaries per stake, but in other places it's normally like two missionaries a ward. Down there, just because the wards are very big, I served in one area with 7 companionships in one ward. And I guess it's not just one ward, because every Sunday you go to both English church and Spanish church, if you have investigators in both, and also to meet with the members. So I guess it's like 7 companionships per the English and Spanish ward. But it's a lot of missionaries that you see at church. Members are really used to just seeing them like all over the place. So it's good to just like have those good relationships with members, so they kind of recognize you and they're willing to help you out. And it's kind of hard. You have to like figure out the members in your tiny part of the ward. That was just one of those things I really wasn't expecting, is just how many missionaries there are, like how many missionaries you see pretty regularly. Most of the time you live with 2 other missionaries for the most part. And so you have like a lot of interaction with other missionaries. It's not like you're just in some like mountain, set apart from everyone else and just kind of working on your own. You're constantly in contact with other missionaries and doing meetings, and on P-Day you all get together. So I really like that part. It was a really great environment. Like if you ever got kind of like sick of your companion, or I don't know, because it does happen. But you could, like, there's always other missionaries to talk to, and always other people. So you never feel too lonely. And with the wards, yeah, like I said, you cover both an English and Spanish ward, so you have coordination with the ward leaders. Like you have 2 ward mission leaders. You have 2 of everything, and it kind of makes things. It can make things difficult and easier. Like there's a few families that we taught like where they just weren't able to go to the Spanish building because of police and immigration and stuff, but they go to the English building, and like most of them were pretty good at English, like at least enough to go to the English ward, and so they're able to go there and get baptized and everything. And so there's like a lot of switching between English and Spanish wards, and just like even language, like all the time. It's one of those things that you can work it pretty well if you just kind of accept that things are pretty fluid. If you think like, no, this is Spanish ward, this is English, like they're separated, it's not going to be that easy for you. It's going to be a little bit harder. But like both bishops like know each other always really well, and it works out pretty well. It's a different experience that's really hard to explain, especially if you haven't been on a mission yet, but just to look forward to it, it's really cool. It's not something you get everywhere you go. To be part of 2 wards and have 2 bishops you help out, and 2 ward mission leaders, and like all the members that are there. As far as members go, there's definitely like a lot of less actives you get to work with, which is actually really rewarding. I like doing that. I can't say like there's like an average of how many members that you have in an area, because that varies a lot. That's one of those things that can kind of make it a little bit harder, is when you have less members. But Yeah, just there's 4 steaks. There's a McAllen steak and a McAllen East steak, or a McAllen West steak. Yeah, and so those are like the 2 main ones in the south. And there's a Harlingen steak, which kind of covers Brownsville and like more to the east, the bottom east. And then there's a Corpus Christi steak, which is where it's really English speaking a lot. And then there's a Laredo district. And Laredo, it's not a stake yet, so it's a district run by the mission president. But so within the mission, there's essentially 4 or 5 stakes, and like a lot of wards. Normally like 200 people a ward. There's a lot of branches too. Normally like 100 people or so in a branch. There's some areas that you learn to some wards and areas you learn to like more than others. What happens a lot is, especially down south, there's a lot of bishops and ward mission leaders that are a little bit more hesitant to make baptisms happen, just because they want to focus a lot on less actives. And just sometimes that can be like kind of a controversy, because you're trying to help people get baptized also, and they kind of want to slow that down at times. But if you have like a really good relationship with the bishop and the ward mission leader, it helps a lot, because they can kind of trust you when you say like, this person's ready to be baptized. That's definitely something that you'll see a lot of when you get there. That's I guess one of the other main goals right now is just to, of course, like better the relationship between the ward leadership, the members, and the missionaries, because there's just so many missionaries, and it's such like a good system that the wards, a few years ago, like they might have, maybe like 10 years ago, they might have like been a lot more reliant on the missionaries. Now that they're kind of like becoming more independent, like it's kind of hard to explain. I guess just before like this, there's some wards that rely a lot on the missionaries to go out and take the sacrament to people, to like kind of do pretty much home teaching and to help people a lot. But as the wards grow, there's like less of a need for missionaries to play a huge role in everything the members are doing, because they're doing it now. And so that's one of the kind of like the changing atmospheres and everything. But just the most important thing is to go in with it, like, with a mindset that you want to be friends with the bishop and with the ward mission leader and all the members. Like that's something really important and key that in this mission in particular. The food, it's really good. Like if you like Mexican food, you're gonna have a great time. So like a lot of it, pretty much every Friday and Saturday night, and Sunday, like they barbecue, and that's just like a huge thing there. And I guess like I wasn't really into barbecue before my mission. Like I was getting like super excited about it, but it's pretty good stuff. Like I guess barbecuing, like here they kind of think like hamburgers and hot dogs, but that's just not like what it is there. They just like get like huge pieces of meat and like ribs and like steak and carne asada, and they just go at it. Like they cook it as like all the time. Like you will get a lot of it, and it's just like the barbecue capital of the world. I feel like that's something that you can get drawn into, is trying to contact a lot of times on like Friday or Saturday night or Sunday, and just trying to talk to people that are out barbecuing. And like that's a good opportunity. Sometimes it's not like the best, because like a lot of times they'll just be like, hey, come here and like we'll just give you food. But I've had some good experiences with it. Taught some really nice families from it. So that's one of the big things food wise, is lots of barbecue. But there's definitely just a lot of Mexican food, like anything you can imagine, from like enchiladas to flautas. I really like those rolled up tacos. I guess like up north it's a little different. There's not as much Mexican food in Corpus Christi and in Sinton and Beeville and everything, Kingsville. It's really, I don't know, it's just kind of like when I went to Corpus, it reminded me a lot of just like a less Mormon Utah, kind of like a mix between Utah and California. It's just kind of like what you expect from a stateside mission, but when you go down south, you're kind of in Mexico, and you can you can tell it. And one of the ways to tell is the food. It's really good. So there is one food though that every missionary fears, and it's called Menudo, and it's like I can't remember if it's like cow or pig intestines, and they just they cook it in a soup. But like the plus side is they know missionaries don't like it. Like that's kind of just like a reputation that missionaries have and so they'll either really want to give it to you or they'll avoid giving it to you. So I only had to have it once, and it's just a really chewy meat, and it just doesn't taste very good. But I've heard of missionaries that really like it and say that it's good. The soup doesn't taste too bad, but as for the meat, it is pretty gross. So that's just my opinion, though. But that's one of those things that everyone tries to avoid. But you should probably do it at least once before you go. That's my suggestion. Yeah, there's definitely lots of spicy food. There's this one member's house. It's in the area, like if you can remember from this, it's in the zone of McAllen. And it's in far south or Alamo South, and the De Leon family, they'll give you, they have this jar of like this type of spice. I'm not even sure what it is, but you just put one drop on your hand and you lick it, and you just, I've never seen someone do it and not cry. Like it's pretty hot, and so it's not always like that hot with all the food, but it is spicy. Like they're pretty respectful if you like. They can like if you're eating it and you're suffering pretty bad, like they won't make you keep eating it. But just to maybe that's if you're not used to spicy food, maybe that's one of those things to prepare for. Definitely that and just eating a lot. Like there's the first area I was in is kind of weird. I only just got like a few dinner appointments. I was there for a few months. But after that, like all the other areas I was in, just you get a lot, and it always kind of like when it rains, it pours. Like it all happens like on the same day or within the same 2 days. You just get a ton of food, and you have to eat a lot. So that's one of those things. Like I didn't quite fully understand how much I could eat before my mission, and then during your mission, you kind of test those limits and boundaries because they just want to keep having you eat more and more, and then you have another dinner appointment later that day. So it's kind of that's one of those things is they definitely like to have you eat a lot. For the Texas McAllen Mission, it's important not to buy like too many tithes before you go out, and the reason for that is there's certain things called bodegas, and they're just like big warehouses down the border where they sell used clothes. And so they get a lot, like what happens is all the missionaries every P-Day that are down south get a lot of, like go to these bodegas and buy like a pound of tithes for like 50 cents. And then you go through and just pick out the best ones. So like it's good to have like a few and have some good ones, but like I came back with like over 100 tithes. And so most people will probably have like a similar experience. And so that's one of those things is not to stress too much about getting good tithes before you go out. It's one of those silly things that are kind of fun. I guess one of the clothing articles, I don't know, the piece of clothing that helped me the most was like my socks. I got like really good ones that were like really good with sweat, and like they're expensive, but they were really helpful. Just because like it gets really hot and it's really humid and you sweat a lot. I didn't really like the mesh garments as much because like they kind of go through and like ruin your shirts a little bit more. But just to have like a good amount of garments and shirts and everything, because like I don't know, you sweat a lot and like your clothes take quite a beating. So I guess that's about it. Just like find them like ways to stay cool, because like I just can't stress enough like how hot and humid it gets. Like it can be terrible some days. So you just want to like have like clothes that like breathe and are good, and good shoes. Good shoes are important. I actually spent a lot of my mission, like even though I talked a lot about the South, that's the unique part, but a lot of it in the stateside part of Corpus Christi. Almost a whole year of it was in that general area. And so for 6 months I was in Corpus Christi, and the first day I got there we found a man named Trevor. He was from Trinidad. He was really great, had a good Jamaican accent. black with this big poofy white hair. He's a great guy, and he's really nice because of some living issues. He's living with like an ex-girlfriend type thing, and he'd actually just got like fired or laid off from his job, and so he's trying to find work, but he wasn't having too much success because of kind of like his age and everything. But we were able to teach him, and we taught him for those whole 6 months. And within that time, I switched to a different area in Corpus, but we still kept teaching him. It was a lot more difficult, but we kept teaching him, and he was able to actually move into our new area. My companion has our new area, and get baptized my last day in Corpus Christi. So those whole 6 months we taught him, and that last day he got baptized, or that last Sunday. And that was just like a really good experience for me and for him, just because we'd grown really close, and I had gone through a few companions, and it was just a really great experience. Sadly, like, we didn't really know about it, but he had a drinking problem beforehand, and he'd actually just quit like a few months before we got there, and he seemed very solid on it, that he'd completely dropped it. But a little bit after I left, he started drinking again, and I was down south, and I just kind of heard that from some of the missionaries, like when we all get together, that kind of took over my area. Found out that Trevor wasn't doing too good, and that he had gotten kind of less active, and so I was pretty bummed about that, because he's definitely probably like one of my favorite converts. And so what really made it interesting is in my second to last area, we got the call for transfers, and they said that I wasn't going to be moving. They told me I'd be staying in my area that I was in McAllen, and that was on Sunday. And then Sunday, like that same Sunday, Trevor had been praying for like a miracle, something to help him get on track again. And he'd actually moved out of Corpus to another part of the mission. And he said he'd been just praying like that whole Sunday afternoon, just like the whole afternoon, for something to happen, some like miracle, so that he could have a way to just get back on track and be part of the church again. And then Monday morning, I got like a surprise call from the mission president, and he said like I was actually going to be transferred, that he felt like I need to be transferred kind of last minute, and he ended up moving me into the area that Trevor had moved into of Kingsville. And so and it was it's a part of the mission that I wasn't too excited to go to. Like, you don't have as much interaction with other missionaries. I was kind of bummed about it. But when I got there, I found out that, like, it kind of clicked to me that that was the area that Trevor had moved to. And that very first day, like, we just set out to find him. And luckily enough, like, that same night we found him again. And I was able to see him, and he got active again, and he had the opportunity to go to the temple and everything. I just like to bear my testimony that I know, like, God loves us, and that he has like really specific things for us to do in our missions. There's definitely selective people that we're supposed to see and to meet, and it might have been, I'm not sure how like the reaction is for a lot of people when they get called to Texas McAllen. Not a lot of people even know where it is, but it really is a great mission. It's the best mission, and you're called there for a reason. I learned a lot on my mission about, I guess, just being in the right place at the right time, and I just really have a strong testimony that was where Heavenly Father needed me to be for those 2 years. Like, there's, like, I just know that He put me there for a reason, and that He puts every missionary there for a reason, for things that only those missionaries can do at those times. It's really amazing how much He loves us, and how much He watches out and cares for each of His children. I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet, and Thomas S. Monson is our prophet today. I know that the Heavenly Father really gives us the gift of tongues, that it's real. And for a lot of people, the language is a struggle, and it was for me. but it it's amazing just that the power that you get as soon as you're called to be a missionary, and the capacity you have to do great things and to learn and to grow. I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.